Have you ever wondered why your colors don't look as impactful as other illustrations out there? Have you ever come up with a beautiful color palette only to find out that once you start using those colors, they simply don't work once they're there in your illustration? Well, in today's video, we're going to take a look at the top 5 things that you should be doing when using colors in your illustration, some of the mistakes you should avoid, and tips and tricks for establishing strong color combinations. My name is Leo and you're watching Ghost Paper, so now let's get to it. Alright guys, just before we start with the list, there's just 2 things that we need to get out of the way. The first one is that even before you open Procreate, go into the brightness settings on your iPad and make sure to check if the brightness is at least at halfway on the slider of brightness. Personally, I use it at about 70 to 75%. I do like to see my colors, I do like to see the UI a little brighter, but I don't like to go all the way to 100. Also make sure that you're working in a bright room, or at least a room that has some nice sunlight coming in. Don't be too close to the window, or don't be too close to the lights if you have some artificial lights turned on. But make sure that you're not using your iPad at a 25% brightness or even 0% brightness because you're really going to have a hard time choosing the right colors that you actually want them to look once you upload to Instagram or any other social media websites. And the second thing is, guys, is that once you create your new file, create a new canvas in Procreate, make sure to go into the Actions menu and then on Canvas subsection and tap on Canvas Information. There's a tab where you can check the color mode for that file. It should be set to sRGB or P3, but not set to CMYK unless you are actually doing something for a print purpose. If what you're doing is going to only live on Instagram or on a monitor, or you're saving for Facebook or your own personal website, make sure that file is set to P3 or sRGB. And the reason is, if it's set to CMYK, your colors are going to look a little bit more muted and not as colorful as the RGB. And that is because the CMYK print process tries to emulate what you get in the real world once you print those colors through a printer. Alright, tip number 1 when choosing better colors for your illustration is always try to minimize, minimize, minimize. It is super exciting to choose a beautiful gamut of colors, but the truth is that it can become pretty hard to use all of those colors you've selected while trying to balance them in your composition at the same time. Instead of starting, for example, with 8 totally different colors, think of starting with 4 colors and use tones of the same hues of those colors to create more options for your palette. The result will have a higher chance to achieve something more pleasing and cohesive while keeping together the storytelling component of your piece. So if you want to create a happier image, for example, start with 4 warmer colors, and if you want to create something moodier and colder, start with 4 colors in the opposite range. Finally, you can create these tone variations by starting with each base color, then adding 20% saturation while subtracting 20% lightness in order to create each darker tone, while for lighter tones, subtracting 20% saturation while adding 20% lightness will give you the tones that you need. I'll link a video here at the top right section of the screen that talks about this technique a little further. Moving on to tip number 2, every color can help to tell a story. If there's something to be learned from Van Gogh's The Bedroom painting, is that from all of the colors used, this little section right here painted in red was done on purpose. And that was to guide the eyes of the viewer to that section of the picture. Notice that color isn't almost anywhere in the frame. So while working with your colors, think about saving one of your colors in your palette for these highlights or special sections of your image, the ones that could really help to tell a story, while the other tones can help build up the base and the midtones of that image. Tip number 3 is a continuation of this principle. Basically, you can use the famous 60-30-10 technique and break down the usage of your colors before you even start painting with them. For example, on a 6-color palette, you can use a maximum of 3 colors for about 60% of the image. In this case right here, I just used the orange and the cream tones for most of the illustration. Then I've tried to keep the other 2 colors for about 30% of the image space, which in this case were mostly the black and white tones. And finally, I kept that one less color for about 10% used for the accent sections of my canvas. In this case, I use the green as my accent color on each side of the illustration to keep things balanced. Tip number 4 is to try to keep things interesting. We all know that nature is usually green and the sky is blue, but using different color palettes for these elements can actually lead to some surprising and even more eye-catching results than if you had just stuck with the original colors. Feel free to explore new combinations, but try to keep in mind the previous tips and rules here in this video. As long as you keep the ratio rule and a minimal color palette, you will do just fine. Now for tip number 5, as important to think about color and tonality, we should also consider choosing colors that create contrast in your image. Take a look at this example here where the colors were all chosen next to each other in terms of contrast. It makes shapes and things harder to identify, and unless this is your intended example, you should really try to find colors that are more spread apart from each other and therefore have better contrast ratio. Now, if you have been watching this video so far, here's one bonus tip especially for you. We're going to be using the Color Harmony tool here in Procreate in order to create a harmonious color palette. First, we're going to create one small black square on a new layer. Next, duplicate the square to sit just next to the first one, but then duplicate the same square about 6 more times, sitting as a row of black squares just underneath the first 2. Next, let's head up to the color panel and we're going to select Color Harmony and then choose the triadic option, as we're going to start with 3 base colors. Now choosing a salmon color here as our first color, we get the 2 other tones that are in harmony with the first one. Drop the salmon color in one of the top squares, the green lime color on the second square. Next, let's now head up to the value color picker and selecting a pure white color, drop the shade onto the first square on the bottom row. Now back in the color menu, let's set that white value to about 80% and drop that shade of gray onto the second square. Let's repeat this process with 60% white, 40% and 20% for the next few squares. Next, using a pinch hand gesture, let's merge all of these bottom layers into one single layer. Tap on your merge layer with all the shadings with all the gray squares, choose select, then create a new layer and fill that layer on top with our third color from the triadic color harmony. Finally, set that purple layer that we have just created underneath our monochromatic squares layer and then set the monochromatic squares layer as an overlay blending mode. The white and black values from our squares layer will influence the purple layer, now creating a perfect selection of tones from the same purple color tone. Now all that you have to do is to merge all these layers and you have just created your perfect harmonious color palette that follows the 60-30-10 technique, doesn't use a lot of different color hues, and allows you to leave one color for the accents of your illustration. So that's it for this video, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed, and if you did, a like would be super appreciated, as well as make sure to hit the subscribe button and the bell notification icon so you don't miss any of those tips and tricks, reviews, speed paint videos, and all the things that are going to make you a better digital illustrator. Now on the right side of the screen, there's always more content for you guys to watch. One is my latest upload, and the other one is a video that YouTube is recommending you to check it out. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, I'll see you on the next one. Ciao.